So, hypothetically, say you're a little company called Victor Entertainment, who's in the business of distributing niche sim games, and you've recently acquired the now bankrupt Pack-In Video and all of their IPs. And, say, one of those games, a brand new little title called Harvest Moon, just hit it big enough to sell over 100,000 copies domestically, and has even seen a launch in the US and Europe. What do? Well, babe, you start pumping out Harvest Moon titles left, right, and center, on every conceivable console available to you like you're trying to convert people to a new religion. That's right, with the new Harvest Moon, Victor Entertainment found their cash cow, pun intended, and they weren't about to let it go to waste. They quickly got to work on multiple new titles in the series, which would eventually lead to a robust release schedule that would average roughly a game per year for the next 2 decades. And the next game in the line to come out would be Harvest Moon on the original Game Boy. As an aside, this is actually one of the few Harvest Moon games I never played until now. In fact, I actually never played any of the original 3 Game Boy games, so this was a new experience. Sorta. First launched in Japan in December of 1997, Harvest Moon on Game Boy came out roughly a year and 4 months after the first Harvest Moon title released on the SNES. While its debut marked it as the first handheld Harvest Moon title, in many ways it's mostly a rehashing of that original game, just now smaller and portable. Honestly, it's a bit of an odd time for the game to come out on the Game Boy. Like its predecessor, Harvest Moon Game Boy came out fairly late in its console's lifetime. In fact, the Game Boy Color was just around the corner, coming out less than a year later in October of 1998. Now, I have no definitive reason as to why they didn't just wait to release it so as to develop it for the Game Boy Color from the ground up, but it may have been a combination of cashing in on Harvest Moon's success by pushing out a mobile version as soon as possible, as well as catering to the safer, pre-established market of Game Boy owners, as opposed to betting on a brand new console. But either way, Harvest Moon would actually end up on both the original Game Boy and the Game Boy Color, as a colorized version for the GBC would be released later in 1999. That version doesn't add any new features aside from being in color, as far as I can tell, but it is the version I played, so it's what you'll be seeing on screen. As for the game itself, the story of Harvest Moon on the Game Boy is thus. Your grandfather has died and left you the farm to revive in his stead. You're visited by your grandpa's dead-ass ghost, who requests that you carry on his mantle and become a true ranch master. If you're familiar with Harvest Moon on the SNES, then you'll be familiar with Harvest Moon on the Game Boy, as it's very much a pocket-sized version of the SNES game, for better and for worse. On the whole, it's built on the same skeleton of its predecessor, taking many of the mechanics and assets directly from the SNES game, albeit shrinking and simplifying many of them to fit on the smaller, less powerful system. However, while much of the game has been shrunken from the SNES title, there's a couple major aspects that are completely new to the Game Boy version. First and foremost being a female character. Yes, Harvest Moon on the Game Boy is the first Harvest Moon game to allow the player to choose between a boy or a girl character, that being Pete from the first game, or new protagonist Sarah. You're also given the option between a dog or a cat as your pet, which will be on your farm by default when starting the game, as opposed to given to you by another character. Time in this game is the same speed as in the original, that being 1 in-game hour for every 15 seconds in real time. However, unlike the SNES game where time effectively froze at 6 p.m., this game's clock keeps on ticking. In fact, it will keep going until 6 a.m., where the game forces you to go to bed, so you can immediately wake up at 6 a.m. Yeah, there seems to be no actual consequence for staying up too late, though I'm not sure why anyone would want or need to. Honestly, I even found myself going to bed early on many days because I ran out of things to do around the farm. Upon starting, you'll notice your farm is roughly the same layout as the SNES game, albeit a bit smaller. The field, while still quite large, is shrunken down a bit, as are the barn and coop. Instead of the maximum of 12 cows and 12 chickens in the first game, Harvest Moon on the Game Boy only allows for a maximum of 4 cows and chickens each. Chickens are simultaneously made cheaper and more profitable in the Game Boy title. Their buying price has been cut in half, from the 1,000 gold in the original to a mere 500 gold. Their eggs too saw a small boost, going from selling for 50 gold to 70 gold each. This makes them much easier to acquire in the early game and can quickly start generating a good profit for the player. Like the SNES game, they do require a set amount of grass to be planted and growing before they can be purchased, but that too has been greatly cut, going from a requirement of 16 squares to only 5. Now, if you think caring for only 4 chickens instead of 12 is going to be faster, think again! With the size of the coop shrinking so drastically, there's not a lot of room to move around. A full coop will very quickly become a Legends of the Hidden Temple-esque trial to navigate, as your chickens will move around and often get in your way and even box you in. If they trap you in a corner while you're holding an item, then Godspeed, because you're stuck there until they decide to move. Cows, unlike their chicken counterparts, didn't really see any price changes from the first game. They're still purchased for 5,000 gold each, and their milk also sells for the same amount as before, that being 150 gold for a small milk, 250 for a medium, and 350 gold for a large. Caring for them also remains the same, consisting of talking to them, brushing, and milking them to raise their affection. One change cows did see is an added middle step in their growth. See, instead of simply going from a calf to a full-grown cow, the stages are small calf to medium-sized adolescent to large full-grown cow. It doesn't really change the time it takes for them to grow, however, and serves mostly for aesthetics, but it's a nice touch. Another addition cows saw was in 2 new shippable items. Previously, the only produce you could get from cows was milk, with a bit of variety in the form of its size. Now you can turn the milk into butter or cheese, with the use of a cheesemaker or a butter maker. These can be purchased from Anne's tool shop by the time you reach your 2nd year for a whopping 30,000 gold each. Now that sounds like a lot, but honestly, if you've worked to fill out both your barn and coop, and kept up with planting throughout the year, then you'll likely have more than enough money to buy both at the same time. Cheese and butter both sell for 500 gold each, no matter the size of milk you put into the machine. So even a barn full of 4 cows that only produce small milks can still get you 2,000 gold a day. Since both cheese and butter sell for the same amount and take the same amount of time to make, a couple seconds in their respective maker, your choice to make one over the other is really just down to preference. I personally like to make 2 of each, just to keep things even. Now it's nice to see them add some variety with more animal produce, but honestly, with both of them being basically identical and serving no real function outside of being something to sell, it's a bit of a distinction without difference, and a missed opportunity to give the player some meaningful choice. Oh, and of course, since these cows are basically the same as the ones from the first game, they belong right here. Now, unlike the previous game, you can't let your animals outside to graze, which is probably for the best considering how many issues that entailed in the original Harvest Moon. No, instead, chickens are locked to the coop, and guiding your cow outside only has you take it on a little walk to raise its affection, which admittedly is kinda cute. The final 2 animals on your farm are your horse and your pet. As previously mentioned, you can now choose between a dog or a cat. As far as I can tell, there's no real difference between the 2, and the choice is once again mostly for aesthetics. You will also receive your horse very early in the game, and just like in the first game, once it grows up and has the saddlebags, it can function like a portable shipping bin. You'll have to actually buy the saddlebags this time around, but if you plan to plant a lot of crops, it's well worth the purchase. Now, as for crops. Just like your livestock, the basic functionality stays the same. You buy seeds and plant them in a 9x9 formation, water them every day until they grow, harvest, profit. If you know the ideal planting formation from the first game, the same rules apply here. Turnips, potatoes, tomatoes, and corn all make a reappearance in this game. Spring crops, the turnips and potatoes, saw only minor tweaks. Both were made cheaper, going down from 200 gold each to 120 gold for turnips and 150 gold for potatoes. They also both saw their growth time raised by 1 day each. Their selling prices, however, remained the same, as did their lack of regrowth, keeping them both one-time harvest crops. Now, summer crops, tomatoes and corn, saw slightly bigger changes. Tomatoes saw a price drop, going from 300 gold to 200 gold, while corn remained at 300 gold. Both crops also sell for more, with tomatoes going from 100 gold to 120 and corn from 120 to 150 gold. Their growth cycle also increased. In the first game, tomatoes took 7 days to grow and corn took 11. Now in the Gameboy game, they take 9 and 13 respectively. They both remain multi-harvest crops, though tomatoes saw a decrease in the days they took to grow, going down to 2 days, while corn saw an increase going up to 5. Honestly, they're good changes for the most part. The crops are all made slightly more profitable right off the bat, but more importantly, tweaking their price and growth cycles offers greater variety. The summer crops especially benefit, and give the player a bit more opportunity to strategize. Do they favor tomatoes, which sell for less, but also cost less and have a rapid regrow rate? or corn, which grows slower all around and is more expensive, but also sells for more. Ultimately, most players will likely plant a little of both, but it's the option to meaningfully play in different ways that matters. Along with these tweaks to existing crops, we also saw an addition of 4 new crops, that being eggplants, peanuts, carrots, and broccoli. Eggplants and peanuts are both autumn crops, and they're nearly identical to spring crops, save for their cost, with eggplants costing 150 gold and peanuts 200. Carrots and broccoli, on the other hand, are winter crops, and are quite different from one another. Carrots are one-time harvest crops, which cost 300 gold and sell for 150, with a growth time of a week. Broccoli, on the other hand, is a multi-harvest crop, and costs a whopping 500 golds per bag, and sells for 150. It also takes 9 days to grow, but all of that is offset by the fact that it only takes 2 days to regrow and be harvested again. Now, unfortunately, you likely won't get access to all 4 of those new crops. See, one weird quirk of this game is hiding those crop options behind how you spell the player name. If you spell your name starting with a capital letter, like a normal person, it will give you access to eggplants and carrots. If you start your name with a lowercase letter, you'll have access to peanuts and broccoli. Only if you spell your name starting with a symbol, such as a heart, will you get automatic access to all 4 new crops. If you spelled your name starting with an upper or lowercase letter, there is one other way of getting those locked off crop seeds, and that's via trading, but we'll get to that. I don't really know why this decision was made. It doesn't feel like a fun secret, just more like arbitrarily gatekeeping of content behind something most players wouldn't even think to do. If they wanted to give some variety and replay value to players based on their choices, then giving players different crops based on if they chose a male or female character would make more sense. It would still be kind of annoying to simply not have access to a chunk of crops, but it wouldn't feel quite so obtuse. Now, making money in Harvest Moon on the Game Boy is going to come largely from your animals and your crops, as there's very little in the way of foraging. In fact, the entirety of the mountain area from the first game is completely gone. In what I assume was a necessary cut to fit the game on the more limited hardware of the original Game Boy, both the mountain and town maps have been removed, leaving only your farm and the buildings on it as free roaming areas. A couple key locations from the mountains have been moved to your farm, however, that being the hot spring and the goddess pond, which are now both located underground on your land. See, in the original game, you had a small area of tunnels under your farm that would unlock after an earthquake. The harvest sprites lived down there, but on the whole, there wasn't a lot going on. Once you got what that area unlocked, there wasn't really a need to return. Not so in Harvest Moon on the Game Boy. This underground area is now more compact and accessible via the back door in the tool shed. It consists of 4 small screens, the main room at the entrance, and rooms to the north, east, and west. In the main room, you'll find a harvest sprite and 2 mushrooms, which serve as your only forageable items in the game. Fortunately, the game is kind and places a shipping bin right there on the same screen, so you don't have to go all the way outside to sell them. To the east, you'll find the relocated hot spring, which functions the same as the first game. Just hop in and out a few times to restore your stamina. To the west is a room with a harvest sprite and a bunch of rocks, which a sign informs you you'll need a pickaxe to break. Finally, to the north is an underground lake, which serves as both fishing spot and goddess pond. There isn't a lot to do in the north or west rooms to start, and you'll likely come down here mostly to grab those 2 mushrooms, or to rest in the hot spring. Now you're probably wondering what happened to the town from the first game, since I mentioned that the farm is the only map you can run around on. And the town is still here, but it's been shrunken down into a map menu. Instead of a full town you can run around in, you simply pick which building to go into, which will pull up the menu for the business. As far as the layout and offerings go, the map is somewhat similar to that of the first game, but a couple of the shops have been shuffled around. On the top row, you have the flower shop, the bar, and the carpenter. On the bottom row, you'll have the tool shop, the bakery, and the animal shop. Finally, to the far left, opposite of your farm, is the church. This compacting of the town does mean the loss of not just the full map to run around in, but also the original game's socializing aspect, since with no town, there's no NPCs hanging around to talk to. That said, the game did do some things to keep the experience charming, the most notable being the new character portraits. The UI of every shop now features a large character portrait of the store owner, that being the 5 bachelorettes from the first game, along with the carpenter and animal shop owner. Previously, the only pictures of the bachelorettes a player would see would be those in the game booklet, or official art in a magazine or ad. Being able to see each of them pictured in-game is an excellent addition, and their portraits are all pretty cute. And the carpenter and animal seller are just the icing on top. I like his fez. That said, it really is a loss. I found myself really missing the town and the mountains and all the NPCs to talk to. Without them, the world suddenly felt much less alive. Their absence really highlights just how important characters and socialization are in the genre. Now, of course, because there's no socializing in this game, that means there's no romance or marriage. Sorry ladies, you might have gotten a female player character, but you won't be getting to marry any bachelors for a while. That also means this game technically doesn't meet all 5 of my pillars of a farming sim, which I laid out in my first video. However, because Harvest Moon on Game Boy is so early in both the series and the genre's timelines, I would feel remiss not to cover it. As you can imagine, there are also no holidays or festivals in the game. Fortunately, there are a couple yearly and random events that can happen, which involve characters, mostly the bachelorettes, paying a visit to your farm. These are generally pretty cute. I especially like the spring picnic and moonlit night, but they're definitely a downgrade from the festivals in the first game. There is one character in the game who you can still make friends with, and that's the harvest sprite in the first room of the cave under your tool shed. You can gift him the mushrooms that grow there, and in return, he'll give you a power berry or even offer to upgrade your tools. Which, speaking of tools, you have the same basic tool set from the first game. The axe, hammer, sickle, hoe, watering can, sprinkler, brush, milker, and cowbell. There are also 3 new and special tools, but we'll get to that later. Now, I don't know why I forgot to mention this in my first video, but an important aspect of your farm tools is upgrading them to better, more efficient versions. For most, this consists of turning a tool into a golden version of itself, such as the hammer becoming the golden hammer. But some become a completely new item, like the watering can becoming the sprinkler. And still others, like the brush, don't upgrade at all. Each tool has a different method of upgrading. Some require you to reach a certain milestone, such as finishing your house upgrades, but the 2 that the Harvest Sprite upgrades in this game are particularly obtuse. See, to upgrade both the sickle and the hoe, you need the help of the Harvest Sprites. But to do this, you have to make use of the game's new timer function. To use the timer, you have to select it in the menu, and then choose if you want it to run slow or fast. Then you have to turn your game off. Yes, completely off, as the timer only works while the game isn't running. During this time, the Harvest Sprites will, in theory, help out on your farm or upgrade your tools once offered. While I got the tool upgrades, it didn't seem like they actually helped on my farm. I'm not sure if it's a matter of the tool upgrade taking precedence over farm work or what, but there you go. It's an interesting idea, and I think I see what they were going for, but ultimately it's a little too obtuse. And it has the potential to bite you in the ass if you forget to turn the timer function off before quitting the game for an extended period of time. Another feature added to Harvest Moon on Game Boy is the trading system, which you use by interacting with the phone in your house. Just like the original Pokemon games, this requires the use of a link cable between Game Boys. Players can trade cows, chickens, pets, and seeds. Trading seeds poses an obvious benefit, as you can acquire the seeds you don't have from a friend that does. And if you're really lucky, trading chickens could result in receiving a golden chicken, which will lay golden eggs. As for cows and pets, it's a little harder to see the benefit. If you trade a baby cow for a medium cow, that baby cow will immediately grow into a medium cow. So I suppose you could use trading to speed up their growth. And pets I really only see as being for novelty, or say, if you chose the dog, but later decided you actually wanted the cat. Sadly, this feature isn't available in any modern ports of the game, so I wasn't able to test it at all, and the information about it is just what I could find online. You also still have stamina to pay attention to in this game, which means the power bears also return, and you'll actually need to find a certain amount of them to properly win the game. Notice I said win. There's a reason for that. See, in the first game, you were given a 2.5-year time limit, and were graded on how well you did by the end of that time. While there was technically a failure ending and a perfect ending, The game was less about winning the game, and more about seeing how your actions affected the endings you got. The Game Boy game, on the other hand, has very exact goals to reach, and doing so is counted as winning. You are given a year to accomplish these goals, but that doesn't mean your game ends after a year. Rather, you're simply graded at the end of every year, with the game checking to see if you've met its goals or not. In fact, you actually can't beat the game in a single year, and it's thanks to those power berries. See, to win the game, you have to reach these milestones. Have 4 adult cows, have 4 adult chickens, cultivated 1,600 pieces of soil, shipped at least 4,500 items, have the second and largest house upgrade, earned at least 65,536 gold, have a happiness rating of 250, and eaten at least 6 power berries. Which you can't do, since only 5 power berries are able to be found in your first year, before your farm expansion. Now at the end of each year, your grandpa's spirit will give you a gift, the first of which is that farm expansion, but in the later years, you'll receive 3 different tools. The first of these new tools is the fishing rod. In the first game, you had to borrow the rod from the fisherman, whereas now, it's a tool you own and can use at your leisure. That said, it feels like it's gifted a little too late. Fish still sell for 300 gold, but by the time I got the rod, I had the max amount of money available, and nothing to spend it on. A good idea rendered a bit useless by how late in the game you'll likely receive it. The next tool is the pickaxe, which is used in that western underground room. There's a whopping 3 power berries hidden in there, so if you want to get all of them, you'll have to play long enough to get said pickaxe. Notably, this is the first instance of what I could call mining in the franchise. It only gets you power berries, and just like the rod, comes a bit too late into the game, but again, the idea is there. Lastly, you'll receive the umbrella, which you can use to make it rain the following day. Handy if you don't want to water your crops, but just like the previous 2, really suffers by basically being a post-game item. And it also takes away one of the few things you have to actually do around your farm. So, how does Harvest Moon on the Game Boy stack up to Harvest Moon SNES? Well, honestly, I think it's the lesser version of the 2. Don't get me wrong, there are good things here. This game features the first appearance of tools and mechanics that would become important staples down the line. And I think the tweaking of crops and animal produce is genuinely heading in the right direction, in terms of giving the player more variety and more choice. The first appearance of a playable female character is also of note. Sarah wouldn't get much representation in the series as a whole, and it would be a while until people could get the full Harvest Moon experience with the female character, but credit where credit is due. It's also cool to have a version of Harvest Moon to play portably, and down the line, some of the handheld Harvest Moon games would end up being fan favorites. And while I wasn't big on features like the timer or trading, I appreciate them trying something new, which they would continue to do in later games, especially the handheld ones. But the game is also hampered by its limitations. When talking about the making of Harvest Moon on the SNES, Yasuhiro Wada spoke on how he wanted a game that wasn't merely menus, and actually allowed a player to interact with the world. While the game retains a little of that in the farm duties, it also sees that menu-heavy design that Wada was so against creep back in. And the loss of being able to socialize, start a family, and explore the nature around your farm really makes the world shrink down, and lose what made the first game so special. I don't dislike this game by any means, and I like the small steps forward it took in the genre. But I can't help but think they should have waited a bit longer and made a more fleshed out game, rather than trying to quickly cram the SNES game onto the Game Boy. I don't particularly see myself returning to it anytime soon, nor would I really recommend it to people, unless they just really had a love of retro games, wanted to go through the entire Harvest Moon franchise like I am, or just really only liked the farming aspects of the series. But hey, that's just me. I'd love to know if you've played this game and what you think of it. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.